The Sunken Sciences. Produced by D.W. Draffin. You're a Dutch fisherman on his trawler with his crew in 1999. One of your nets comes up from the bottom of the sea bearing not just a shining mass of mackerel, but the unmistakable head of a woolly mammoth, its curving tusks tangled in the lines. How did such a creature end up at the bottom of the sea? Doggerland. 20,000 years ago, this unfamiliar landscape is how the bed of the North Sea between Britain and continental Europe appeared. Glaciers of the Ice Age had locked up the world's water and lowered the sea level by as much as 120 meters, changing global shorelines. For perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, as the glaciers extended and retreated across northern Europe and Scotland, Doggerland persisted as a riparian landscape that may have been the most rich in the region. Paleolithic megafauna such as woolly mammoth and woolly rhinoceros grazed the lowlands. Neanderthals filled the river valleys with settlements. As the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose, glaciers retreated, and the lowest parts of Doggerland began to permanently fill with water. Around 6200 BCE, it is theorized that the catastrophic Storegga slide off the coast of Norway created a tsunami large enough to swamp what remained of Doggerland, which has been submerged ever since. Only in the 19th century did fishing hooks and traps pull mysterious bones and tools from the sea floor, leading to hypotheses which eventually became a clear theory on the lost world of Doggerland. This sea level rise happens everywhere, constantly, with periodic dramatic events reshaping whole continents again and again over the eons. It occurs not only upon the coastlines of the oceans, but alongside lakes and rivers as well. Over millennia, our ancestors on every continent abandoned their homes to the rising tides. Many of those homes and villages have been relocated to higher ground, and many stories survive in ancient texts and iconography of their lost past. Following these clues in the historical record, and drawing upon a bewildering variety of sciences to advance their theories, today's researchers are able to identify more and more underwater sites off the coasts of the world, such as Doggerland, that deserve a closer look. The study of these lost settlements among the paleo-landscapes and paleo-coastlines of the world is a growing branch of submerged landscape archaeology and archaeogeophysics. It combines specialists and technicians from many disciplines who work together to bring clarity to ruins hidden by the waves and lost to time. New technologies have allowed many of these latest revelations to occur. These involve side-scanning sonar, which is towed behind research vessels pinging the seabed multiple times per second. Its results allow for more detailed mapping of hidden surfaces. Magnetometers measure Earth's background magnetic levels in nanoteslas, indicating sunken metals with magnetic properties. Elaborate seismic mapping, much of it done by petroleum companies looking for oil deposits, allows us to peer under accumulated silt and debris to discover the shape of the land as it existed before it was submerged. LiDAR is beamed from aircraft, penetrating the waves and the land as well to reveal structures and anomalies beneath. Imaging technologies are able to find patterns and structures in what otherwise look like digital noise, and remote-controlled vehicles are being used to bring light and measuring tools to dark places, and even sometimes return with samples. All these new tools have allowed archaeologists around the world to analyze remote ruins underwater and challenge models built on long-standing assumptions. Their discoveries have upended many traditional views on the definition of various eras and the migration of early human populations. But, perhaps, not in the way that has often recently been portrayed. In popular media, there is a growing trend to excite audiences about the prospect of lost kingdoms, empires that used to rule vast stretches of the world, but whose very existence has been scraped clean by the advance and retreat of glaciers. Their ideas are more akin to dime store pulp fiction than scientific papers. These feverish flights of fancy obscure the real and exciting work being done in this field, which continues to reveal actual important details about the development of modern humans without the need for Aquaman or Conan the Barbarian. Now, this doesn't make me some humorous literalist who is incapable of thinking outside the box. I'm also a fantasy and science fiction novelist who has used many lost settings, such as these, in which to place my work. I ran an RPG set in Conan's Hyborian universe just last year. But understanding the difference between the fiction we would like to be true and the actual reality that must be based on evidence and reason are two very different things. Yet for many people, they have become the same. Without evidence, we can't build hypotheses and models that conform to the world we live in. Evidence is everything. And for those who contend that there is a grand conspiracy among the working archaeologists and anthropologists of the world to conceal or destroy evidence of fabled kingdoms and even continents that have sunk beneath the waves, that idea is too simple and neat to be real. These scientific fields are too complex, too heterogeneous, so competitive that if anyone showed up with actual proof of Atlantis, far from being shouted down, they would gain journal articles and book deals and tenure for life. So instead of dwelling on conspiracies and hidden truths, which are little more than fan fiction for pseudo-history, let's instead focus on what these disciplines are actually teaching us about the submerged world we have lost. The actual discoveries of marine archaeologists are coming fast and furious these days, revealing evidence of human habitation in surprising places and modes around the globe. Yet these are not shining cities built by aliens, but rather settlements of the appropriate age and technology for their eras that allow us to chart the rise and migration of everyone from Homo erectus all the way to Neanderthalensis to early modern humans. For example, northern Tanzania has Lake Manyara. The shores of this ancient lake have hosted activity by hominins since at least the early Middle Pleistocene, with bone fragments of Homo heidelbergensis recovered there. But many of their coastal encampments and structures now lie high on its hillsides and hidden beneath its waters. From a 2014 study, the delineation of paleo-shorelines in the Lake Manyara Basin using Terra-SAR-X data. The authors state, "The purpose of this paper is to describe the delineation of paleo-shorelines using high-resolution microwave images and digital image processing tools, and with that to contribute to the understanding of the complex landscape evolution of the Lake Manyara Basin. The surroundings of Lake Manyara are the focus of several paleoarchaeological investigations, since the location is close to Olduvai Gorge, where paleoanthropological findings can be traced back to Homo habilis. In the catchment of Lake Manyara, two hominin-bearing sites, 780,000 to 630,000 years ago, lots of vertebrate fossils and hand axes from different periods were found." In 2014, the use of imaging processing was innovative at the time and has since led to a survey of the paleo shorelines of other lakes, including those on the Sinai Peninsula and in Sudan's Darfur, as well as on the shores of North America's Great Lakes and among the paleo lakes of the Tibetan Basin. They have also charted Mesolithic and Neolithic drainages across North Africa. They reveal an Africa that was, an early Stone Age period that began over 2.8 million years ago. The world was greener, coming off a long period of warmth that was about to be interrupted by the ice ages of the Quaternary period. The Sahara was at times a lush grassland, alternating with its current desert status on a generally steady 41,000-year cycle driven by the monsoons of the North African climate cycle. These drainages are the remnants of the floods that empty the Sahara of its water during those cycles. In a journal article from 2021 titled Submerged Landscapes, Marine Transgression, and Underwater Shell Middens, Comparative Analysis of Site Formation and Taphonomy in Europe and North America, the authors write, "Submerged coastal landscapes are critical for addressing key questions identified as grand challenges for archaeology in the 21st century. These include responses to quaternary climatic and sea level change, colonization of new territories and new continents, early developments in seafaring, the intensified use of coastal and marine resources, and their contribution to the development of complex foraging subsistence systems, agricultural dispersals, and monument building. And the potential significance of the archaeology associated with the drowned landscapes of the continental shelves is increasingly acknowledged in recognition of the fact that sea levels were lower than the present for 95% of human history, and therefore that most paleo shorelines are now underwater. The authors elaborate. Shell middens, sometimes in the form of mounds of great size, are a ubiquitous indicator of coastal settlement and exploitation of marine resources across the world. However, shell middens are relatively rare before the mid-Holocene because most paleo shorelines before that time are now submerged by sea level rise since the last glacial maximum. Previously reported examples of underwater shell middens are almost unknown and of uncertain status, and it has generally been assumed that such deposits would not survive the destructive impact of sea level rise or would be indistinguishable from natural shell deposits. Recently, 2 examples of underwater shell deposits have been independently discovered and verified as anthropogenic midden deposits: a Mesolithic shell midden on the island of Yarnø in the Straits of Denmark, and a middle to late archaic shell midden in the Iconfina Channel of the Gulf of Mexico, Florida. The ice ages come and go, their glaciers advancing from the poles to cover the land and lock up the water of every ocean. What seem like immutable borders between the land and the sea, like the cliffs of Dover or California's coastal range, have instead been anonymous hillsides far inland for much of their geologic history. In the time of Doggerland, Dover faced a long, open, hilly decline, the English Channel of today ending in a wide bay. On the west coast of North America, for much of its coastline, a shallow shelf keeps coastal waters warm. A 120-meter drop in sea level enlarged the continent nearly 4 more kilometers in places, meaning that any Pleistocene habitats on the Pacific coast would now be buried beneath leagues of water. For generations, that prevented scientists from looking. But now, bolstered by new discoveries that may indicate modern humans set foot in the Americas thousands or even tens of thousands of years before the accepted dates of Clovis or even the contested dates of Monteverde at 18,000 years ago, theories that had once seemed unprovable are now being tested. The coastal kelp highway hypothesis has made sense to many researchers for a long time, but the lack of physical evidence to back up its claims have kept it from being seriously considered. The idea that seafaring nomads could have paddled or sailed around the glaciers that block other landbound migrants to reach coastal American shores seems to be gaining traction now. Mitochondrial DNA studies of Native American populations of North, Meso, and South America indicate that such ancient explorations may have happened over 20,000 years ago. Discoveries of footprints and butchered animals across both continents are being reliably dated to 16,000 to 18,000 years ago. It is becoming more likely that the Americas were well settled by then, although that remains a highly contentious statement. Further north, Particularly where coastal land was close to the glaciers, there has been an isostatic rebound effect as kilometers of ice withdrew. In many places, the land sprang back up when the ice melted, rising 100 meters or more as the weight lifted. Along certain stretches of British Columbia's islands, the coast today is nearly the same as it was over 14,000 years ago because the land rebounded nearly the exact amount to preserve the ancient shoreline. This has prompted teams of archaeologists to look for and find at the edges of the water evidence of human habitation. Obsidian tools, fishhooks, and a fire starter have been found on a site on Trique Island by the archaeologist Duncan McLaren and his team. These artifacts and clay footprints of an adult and child on nearby Calvert Island have also been dated to this time period. But isostatic rebound is very localized. As people may have paddled further south, away from the glaciers, they would have made camps on sites that are now under sea, over a vast area that nearly stretches from pole to pole. What may lay hidden under the waves could eventually prove the Kelp Highway hypothesis correct, but as archaeologist Ben A. Potter has said about this entire field of study, until there's actual evidence that people were in fact there, then it remains just an interesting hypothesis. In the journal article, A 9,000-Year-Old Caribou Hunting Structure Beneath Lake Huron, the authors write, 9,000 years ago, the Alpena-Amberley Ridge beneath modern Lake Huron was a dry land corridor that connected northeast Michigan to southern Ontario. The newly discovered Drop 45 Drive Lane is the most complex hunting structure found to date beneath the Great Lakes. The site and its associated artifacts provide unprecedented insight into the social and seasonal organization of prehistoric caribou hunting. When combined with environmental and simulation studies, it is suggested that distinctly different seasonal strategies were used by early hunters on the Alpena-Amberley Ridge, with autumn hunting being carried out by small groups and spring hunts being conducted by larger groups of cooperating hunters. In the paper, Sedimentary DNA from a Submerged Site Reveals Wheat in the British Isles 8,000 years ago, researchers used marine core samples to reveal that the Solent estuary used to not only be land, but that it was agricultural land as well. From the paper, the Mesolithic to Neolithic transition, which coincided with rising sea levels, marked the time when a hunter-gatherer economy gave way to agriculture. Boldner Cliff is a submarine archaeological site with a well-preserved Mesolithic paleosol, dated to 8,000 years ago. We analyze a core obtained from sealed sediments, combining evidence from microgeomorphology and microfossils with sedimentary ancient DNA analyses to reconstruct floral and faunal changes during occupation of this site before it was submerged. In agreement with palynological analyses, the SEDA DNA sequences suggest a mixed habitat of oak forest and herbaceous plants. However, in later sediments, they also provide evidence of wheat 2,000 years earlier than expected. These results suggest that sophisticated social networks linked the Neolithic front in southern Europe to the Mesolithic peoples of northern Europe. Once we move forward in time, the discoveries become even more dramatic. You've been waiting to hear about ancient submerged cities, and here they are. The earliest that has been discovered is Pavlopetri in Greece, which dates back nearly 5,000 years. Perhaps the remains of a Cycladic culture city, Pavlopetri features a recognizable town plan, with buildings and tombs and roads connecting them. Divers in 2009 and 2015 mapped the city and discovered artifacts reaching back to the final Neolithic age. Inundated after a trio of catastrophic earthquakes around 1000 BCE, Pavlopetri was cut off from the Peloponnese mainland, and the land it was on became the island Elefonisos. Long wear marks in the stone shelves of the island indicate that carts used to be wheeled across roads that have now been submerged for 3,000 years. Another coastal city that succumbed to earthquakes and soil liquefaction was Thonis Heraklion on the Egyptian Mediterranean. Its heyday was the 6th to 4th centuries BCE, nearly 3,000 years ago, and it is made mention of on steles found in Egypt as well as in myths told by the Greeks. For a long time, it was assumed Thonis and Heraklion were two separate cities lost to the ages, but when a matching stele was found in the submerged ruins that matched a decree of Nectanebo I, known as the Stele of Naucratis, it proved that these two cities were indeed one. Located over 7 kilometers from today's coast and submerged at a depth of 5 or 6 meters, this city was built around a central temple and featured canals. In the depths of Lake Titicaca on the Peru-Bolivia border, sacrificial materials left by the Tiwanaku people on the Island of the Sun have been dated between 1,000 to 1,500 years old. In the Incan religion, it is believed that the sun god was born here. One complex on the island, built in the shape of a puma, allowed priests and leaders to offer sacrifices and prayers in a setting that still inspires today. Situated at 3,800 meters in altitude, the Lake Titicaca Basin held small groups of hunter-gatherers starting around 1500 BCE and was home to around 1 million people when the Spaniards first arrived in the 16th century. The Koa Reef is fully submerged nearby, and recently teams of divers have been bringing up well-preserved treasures that were offered to the waters. Puma and condor carvings and sculptures made from gold sheets and lapis lazuli. Llama bones from one site indicate the meal of the worshippers, as well as the shells of spiny oysters from the Ecuadorian coast nearly 2,000 kilometers to the north. Christophe Delaire, a marine archaeologist at the University of Oxford and the Free University of Brussels, told the Guardian newspaper, "What is great about these artifacts is that beyond their beauty and the quality of manufacture, they were discovered in an undisturbed context. This is one of the advantages of underwater heritage. Lake Titicaca protects its ancient material culture from time and man. Never before have so many artifacts of this quality been discovered. The history that these objects tell us is exceptional." Throughout the temperate world, wherever water meets the land, life abounds. People have always found that living a few convenient paces from the water's edge gives them numerous advantages. But so much of what has come before still lies hidden under the waves. Finally, But wait, there's more. This field is moving so fast, with so many papers being published, that 2 new discoveries were made in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 2 weeks since I wrote and recorded this episode. The first is a late Neolithic site off the coast of the Croatian island Korčula. At 7,000 years old, its submerged road of stacked stone plates is the oldest road found anywhere in the world. Archaeologists believe this road was constructed by the Hvar culture, a Neolithic culture that spread along the coasts of the eastern Mediterranean and may have been centered on Hvar Island. The road they constructed ran from the mainland to a settlement that is also now underwater, the ancient village of Solin, which was discovered in 2021 and dated to roughly 4,900 BCE. A second settlement has now been discovered nearby in Gradina Bay of a similar age and has yielded flint blades, stone axes, and millstone fragments. These ruins are exceptionally well preserved because they exist among a dense network of islands that prevent large currents and waves from disturbing the sites. And off the coast of Naples, in Italy, a team of researchers has discovered a sunken temple dedicated to the Nabatean god Dushara. This is remarkable for a number of reasons. First, the inhabitants. The Nabateans were an ancient Arab culture that is most famous for the desert city of Petra in current-day Jordan. They were a unique and advanced culture for their time and place, hiding caches of water in the dry landscape using a secret system known only to their own people. In this way, they survived droughts and invasions that felled their neighbors. The second astounding fact about this discovery is its location. It is on the far side of the Italian peninsula, facing west. The power centers of Nabatean culture were always in the eastern Mediterranean, and this proof of Nabatean structures so far west shows just how influential they had become. And third, the date of the discovery is important. These are not the first Nabatean structures discovered near Naples. The ancient city of Puteoli, which is now submerged, has been known as a Nabatean settlement for some time. But a temple dedicated to Dushara, who is the chief deity of the Nabateans and their dispenser of justice, indicates that even during the height of Roman culture and power 2,000 years ago, the Nabatean gods still were worshipped by a significant following. Finally, a test subject for pseudoscience. In Japan, the Yonaguni Monument is an undersea, stepped shelf rock formation off the coast of the Ryukyu Islands, about 100 kilometers from Taiwan's coast. Discovered in 1986, many people see the work of human hands in its straight lines and right angles. Scratches on the rock faces appear to be ancient drawings, and large structures can perhaps be picked out among the shapes. Yet after extensive study, geologists have concluded that the formations are natural, a sandstone bed that is regularly fractured by sea quakes and eroded by strong currents, resulting in a formation that is actually not that uncommon. So, if we want to prove it was humans who built these structures, we need to look at alternate lines of evidence. Some of the best reasoning I've seen about this subject is the analysis of Neolithic trade networks. If the Yonaguni Monument represents a civilization that once existed, then neighboring cultures would have some credible and reputable evidence of it, whether in the form of stories or artifacts that purportedly came from that civilization. The supposed date of the civilization that would have built the undersea structures of Yonaguni has changed over the years as its supporters have tried to fit their observations to the data. But whether it is 20,000, 10,000, or 3,000 years old, none of the surrounding civilizations possess any of the surprisingly high-value goods that such a civilization would produce. In Africa, at the Kenyan site of Olorgesailie, evidence of human trade networks has been discovered from 320,000 years ago, at the dawn of modern human civilization. Ötzi, the Iceman of the Alps, who lived and died over 5,000 years ago, wore many articles and contained many substances in his body that came from extensive trade networks across Europe. But none of them came from mysterious supercultures with powerful technologies. So if a Yonaguni empire was so productive and advanced, where are any of the artifacts that culture made? But many of the believers persist, connecting Yonaguni to the pseudo-historical continent of Mu. First hypothesized by 19th century naturalists and popularized in the early 20th century by writers who had only ever heard of 5 to 10 locations in Antiquity, so many of them drew conclusions based on the sparse data they had. Others were less innocent. Mu is known as a catch-all for many conspiracies, including the idea that ancient aliens may have founded humanity, or that, conversely, underground lizard people did, or, generously, they both did together. In many conceptions, Mu is known as a founding location for the fictitious white race, And this is where one can begin to see the dangers of conspiratorial thinking. When toxic ideas like these persist, even in the face of solid scientific research, it is often because they hide racist or other tribal views. This is the legacy that we must account for when entertaining the fanciful notions of Atlantis or Mu. The justifications such fictional histories grant racists are more valuable to them than the breathless images of sword and sorcery that entertain us all. As a writer, I know how useful it is to find that setting just at the edge of what is known, where the names are familiar, but there isn't quite enough historical detail for experts to contradict you. Anything can happen there, and it becomes a playground for our imagination and a court where we can try and convict that which we hate the most. But in the hands of the wrong people, convincing poorly educated audiences that science and scientists are to blame for hiding the truth from us becomes the only way to validate their beliefs. Don't let them. Follow the evidence.